Well, welcome. My name is Dave Bruton. I'm the Utilization and Marketing Forester for the Kansas Forest Service. And today we're going to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities associated with utilizing our ash trees. I'll not only incorporate ash, but just in general, all wood species. Ash just happens to be the tree of interest in this particular presentation because of the threat of emerald ash borer. And as the first slide indicates here, wood is good. Wood is a natural, renewable resource, meaning that if we harvest materials, make product out of it, if we do a good job of managing as stewards of the land, we can replant and regrow trees. And so, trees, as far as I'm concerned, I can't think of a better natural resource for being able to utilize, and the benefits that they provide us are really amazing. So, we'll start. With basically, there's no difference between trees that loggers are looking at in the woods versus what trees are coming out of our urban type situations. One of the big challenges with urban trees is that they oftentimes contain metal or wire or just foreign materials from people putting squirrel feeders up, bird feeders, those sorts of things. So those are some of the challenges with utilizing our urban trees. But the urban trees can be utilized just the same as our rural trees. It's just that the loggers don't have as much interest in those urban trees because of those issues of foreign materials, and also the loggers don't have the typical equipment necessary for removing trees in urban situations that are close to power lines or what I call targets, sheds, outbuildings, just fences, those sorts of things in an urban situation that we're going to run into. But basically, what the loggers are looking for is a tree that is straight. I'll show a picture a little bit later of a tree on a sawmill, and you'll understand why. Maybe we need to have a good straight log to be able to produce much material out of it. The tree needs to be about 16 inches, what we refer to as diameter at breast height, which is what the DBH stands for here. And basically, that diameter at breast height in this particular case is measured outside the bark. You'll notice that it says a log with a 12-inch DIB, that's diameter inside bark, and basically a 16-inch diameter tree outside bark. By the time you get up about 8 feet on the tree with the taper and the thickness of the bark, you end up with about a 12-inch inside bark diameter. Veneer quality logs, typically the loggers are cutting those anywhere from 8'4" to 8'6". That allows for a little bit of extra trim during the manufacturing process, and it just gives you a little bit of leeway there. Of course, the loggers and anybody that's looking at utilizing materials, basically, if we've got big knots or defects on the sides of the tree, that's going to translate into those defects being as part of the lumber when we mill that. And so we'd like to have trees that are clear on what we call faces, and a face is basically with the way loggers and timber buyers look at things is they'll divide the tree into four quadrants and base the number of clear faces upon that. And then most of the time, one of the challenges we run into, especially in urban situations, is that even if you have a good tree, it's not as efficient for loggers, the traditional loggers, to come in and work with just one tree. They would rather deal in full truckload quantities. But our urban, their arborists and folks like that do deal with individual trees, and so that's a good way to try to utilize the material, and arborists are becoming more acquainted with trying to utilize, and there are a few that do have sawmills that are scattered throughout the state as well. I'll put these links in here for those that may be interested in trying to connect with the timber buyers or the sawmills that we have here in the state. There's also a publication called Marketing Kansas Timber. It's a pretty quick read. It's only about 4 pages in length, but it contains a sample timber sale agreement, which is basically a contract that can be signed between a homeowner, a landowner, and the logger. And basically, it just explains what's expected of each party through the timber sale process. But the timber buyers are basically the loggers that are out there in the state, and of course the Kansas sawmills. Those are folks that operate sawmills that provide their services for the public. And those sawmills are listed on a county basis. If you look at that listing, it'll start alphabetized by county, and so you can find those mills that are closest and nearest to you to try to work with. The same is true with the timber buyers. That's a county by list or a listing by county, but it also contains several out-of-state timber buyers because the loggers do run pretty big circles in their purchasing of materials. Of course, with urban trees, as I mentioned before, the chances of those trees having metal in them or foreign materials, that's why loggers and the traditional sawmill operators don't get terribly excited about urban trees. You'll see lots of things inside of trees, foreign materials. Here we've got steps leading up to a tree house. Of course, those steps are either nailed or screwed on. We've got a little squirrel feeder. They're off to the side and a tree house at the top. So these are all challenges that we run into. The other challenge that we run into oftentimes is metal from barbed wire. Just if a fence is close to that tree, of course the tree just as it butts up next to that barbed wire each year as it puts on its annual ring of growth, it'll eventually grow around that barbed wire. And sometimes if that wire or foreign material is clipped and then the tree continues to grow, that material is hidden inside and really not observable by the naked eye if you look at it. So that's again why some of our loggers and sawmill operators get a little bit nervous about yard type trees and those coming from urban situations. Um, if a tree is cut, one of the things that loggers look for, or even in the arborist side of things, if they're looking at utilizing the tree, you'll see some staining caused from the minerals from the iron, and that's what this log is showing here. Those dark spots there on the about 3 o'clock, and also down at 6 o'clock on this particular cutting. That's the mineral from the iron being picked up by the tree, and it causes that discoloration. And oftentimes it's kind of a purple color when the tree is freshly cut, and will turn to a much darker color over time. Of course, lots of things end up in the trees and form materials. And in this particular case, you don't see any staining around the material in here. This happens to be a cedar log, an eastern red cedar log. That's a ceramic insulator that was inside of the tree. I happened to stop in the sawmill shortly after they had hit the material in here. And of course, they had downtime. But you can see the ceramic insulators have basically been cut in half, and see the cross section there, but you don't see any of the staining that was an indicator that was inside of the tree. So in those cases, one of the things that we recommend, or that I recommend, is that if people are going to be milling trees in urban type situations, getting a good metal detector is a very good investment. This particular metal detector has a specifically designed foot. It was kind of specifically designed for logs. You can see how the base of that, or the foot part of the metal detector, is curved. It's designed specifically to curve around trees and to be able to help pick up any detection of metal inside of the tree that way. Of course, concrete. This happens to be a piece of concrete that was in an urban tree. Basically, years ago, it was pretty common practice. If a tree had a hollow or a cavity in there, arborists or people in the arborist industry would fill those cracks or crevices or voids with concrete to try to prevent animals and other things from trying to inhabit that area and make the decay expand further. And this happens to be a cross section of a piece of wood that a sawmill operator hit. They didn't see any staining or indication of there being any metal inside of the tree. But then they took a chainsaw and made some cross cuts and finally worked themselves down to that point and we're able to pick up just this piece of concrete that had been placed inside of that tree. As I mentioned earlier, having trees that are straight are going to be what most loggers and sawmill operators are going to yield the most product. In this particular case, this was a demonstration that we hosted down in Franklin County several years ago. And you can see when we put a sawmill like this on the sawmill, when it makes a flat, straight cut, you're not going to end up with very long pieces that are going to have much length at all. And so that's what loggers, you're going to get some good product out of it, but in this particular case, not as much material as it would have been if that log were straight and flat. And then here's another good example. This happened to be a demonstration that we did up in Holton several years ago, and you can see we've got a nice straight ash log on the mill here, and it produced some really nice lumber at that particular time. Of course, there's lots of different mills out on the market. You'll see mills that take all the way down to really small material, just cost a few $1,000s, up to those mills that have a lot more bells and whistles on them, in the $50,000 to $75,000 range, and everything in between. So you'll see lots of different models that are out there and brands. I'll just show you a few that are kind of readily available and are out on the market. And then here, basically, if lumber is milled, we do what we call sticker that lumber to try to help it dry flat, to try to help the mold from building up in there. You'll notice in this particular stack, we've got basically there's the stickers as referred to here are the cross. What you do is you lay a layer of boards down, and then you put perpendicular to the span of those boards, you lay other boards. And in this particular case, you'll notice that there are some plastic, looks like kind of half pieces of pipe that have been cut on the bottom right hand stack and then the first few rows of that stack above it. But then you'll notice just regular wood stickers that are placed between the stacks to the other side, and then also the upper part of that right hand stack. And basically, what that does is allows the airflow through that stack to allow the lumber to dry. And then typically people will air dry material for a little while and then place it in a kiln. By air drying, you're taking a lot of the free water away, the time and expense associated after it's put in a kiln. You would like to do that as much as possible naturally without having any energy inputs into that. So that's what this is showing here is a nice, really nice stack of lumber that's been properly stickered. You'd like to have those stickers line up perfectly from top to bottom in each row. If you just kind of randomly throw the stickers in each layer, then you could have the potential of ending up with wavy boards because of the weight from the upper portions of that stack. Just the weight of that just naturally bridging across at varying points will end up causing boards to be a little bit wavy. Lots of opportunities for different drying. This happens to be what we call a solar kiln. Basically, it's just an open room on the inside of that. In this particular case, we've got a big back door on the far left-hand side that opens up so that you can more easily load material into the kiln as opposed to having to walk it all through the little front door there. And basically, the sun comes in at that angle. That's all just the kind of clear fiberglass, kind of poly type material that makes up the face of the kiln. Inside, everything is painted black. And so as the sun comes through, it heats that material, heats the air on the inside of that, fans inside of it, helps circulate, and lots of different varieties of that also that you'll find across the landscape. Here's another solar kiln. You can see that they just use regular old glass panels. Inside of that, again, the fiberglass and kind of a darker color material to help absorb the heat from the sun that brings the heat into the kiln itself. And then here's another well-designed solar kiln that I like. You've got a shed on one side, so they're able to load the kiln from the inside of that building, and then offload the material out in the same area and store that material inside of the shed portion of it. But again, you can see the you can see the panels on this side that allow the sunlight to come through and absorb the heat and transport that heat into the kiln and help circulate it for drying. There's lots of commercial kilns that are on the market too. This happens to be a smaller type of commercial kiln. I believe this one is a Nile, is the brand of that. One of the things that I liked about this particular kiln is you'll notice back behind is an outdoor wood boiler system. Basically, the inside of this kiln had tubing that the hot water would come from the outdoor boiler system into the kiln to provide the heat, and then of course air circulation inside of the kiln through fans, and it was just a good way to help dry the wood by using wood as your heat input needs. And oftentimes at the sawmills, they've got a lot of wood waste, and so using that product in an outdoor boiler type system it works very well. This is what you might see at a bigger commercial operation. Just again, another big, just steam type or boiler type kiln in various sizes. You'll see these commercially throughout the area. And one of the things that I find interesting is what people find to do with wood products. And in this particular case, this cooperator was making hardwood flooring, some trim, and those sorts of things. And this is ash that he has here that's made some corner pieces for some trim or door trim area. And so lots of opportunity to utilize the ash material. In this particular case, this happens to be Eastern red cedar. It's kind of a little shelter area that was outside of a little gazebo type place, and basically this is made of Eastern red cedar, but it could be made from ash or other products. Ash is not as weather resistant. For outdoor applications, really indoor applications are the best for the ash species. But if you did use it outdoors and treated it well with outdoor treatments, you could get a pretty good life out of it. But ideally, it's probably best suited for indoor applications and probably leave the outdoor applications for some of those other species that are better suited. I took this picture. This was in Topeka several years ago. They had taken down several trees throughout the city, and they worked with a local sawmill operator to mill up various species of trees and make park benches. This lower right-hand corner is a park bench, and I do believe that is ash that's made out of. And then also they made dog-eared panels for putting up fencing. And so, very good applications for that. Again, if you're using ash in these applications, you're going to have to treat it because ash has really an open pore structure and not necessarily designed for outdoor applications, but you will get some, life expectancy out of it, but better designed or applicable for indoor situations. Of course, we work with lots of crafters around the state, and I threw this picture in just to show these are all natural colors. There's no staining that's been applied to this, and so lots of different woods throughout the state that have lots of unique color. And basically, the ash is going to be a lighter color throughout, but oftentimes the heartwood can be a little bit have some color to it, a darker color that way. So some variability in the ash lumber itself, but you could use ash easily in situations or products like this. And here's just another example of some artwork that can be easily made, and not only with ash, but with any of the other species of wood that we have here in Kansas. And then, of course, chainsaw carvers. This happens to be a maple tree, and maple's not very decay resistant either, but these have been around for quite some time. But in a landscape type situation, just kind of like to encourage people to keep their options open and consider things like this. Because I think this adds interest and very attractive and encourage people to sometimes think outside the box. Of course, lots of different opportunities of utilizing our woods and planter boxes, beds and furniture and little entrance ways. But again, these are all eastern red cedar, but could be a lot of our native woods here in Kansas used for products like this. And then just simply, you know, again, indoor planter kind of artsy type things that people could consider, just adding a little bit of interest to your interior decoration. And in this particular case, this is showing lots of different native woods. This happens to be at my house. This is the entranceway. Several years ago, we were putting in new hardwood flooring, and my wife is a quilter. And so I was interested in trying to incorporate lots of different species into a quilt block pattern. And the upper left hand shows the product after it was initially installed. You'll notice at the very center is kind of a more yellow color. That is actually Osage orange, or hedge is referred to here in Kansas a lot. Over time, that hedge, you'll notice in the lower right-hand corner, becomes kind of more of a honey brown or darker brown and almost has the same appearance as walnut over time. And then this, again, is at my house. This is some ash that's on a little step going down into the next room. You'll notice here on the left-hand side, and it's the horizontal pieces are ash, and the vertical pieces are oak. And you can see that the oak and the ash really not a lot of characteristic differences when you look at it by the naked eye. And so it's very attractive and has application in flooring and things like this as well. Of course, there's lots of opportunity for again, slab wood has become very popular, and so you can bake big slab pieces, make tables, those sorts of things. This is just one brand of sawmill that we have some of these in the state. Oftentimes they can mill up to around 70-inch diameter material. There's just a big bar, like a chainsaw that goes horizontal in this particular model, that goes through and produces slabs. You have to dry these slabs for an extended period of time. You just can't go from a freshly cut tree to a final product in a short time period. Oftentimes you have to dry those, and kind of a rule of thumb is for every inch thickness of that slab, you want to let it air dry for about a year. And we do have some kilns in the state, vacuum type kilns, that are able to dry the material much more quickly. And you could get a finished product or get it to a point where you could utilize it as a slab much quicker than that. But just if you're using traditional kind of air drying it and then wanting to put it in a kiln, it can take some time with this thicker type material. Of course, lots of different products, table in the upper left-hand corner, benches in that upper right-hand corner, tables down on the lower portions, and lots of different ways that you can do that. You can see that lower left-hand corner table, it just has glass placed over the top of it, so you can do some different things. And then that lower right-hand corner, either make that as a little table or a bench. Lots of different opportunities there. One of the things that for exporting material, the material has to be, in order to be exported outside of the United States, has to be treated. and methyl bromide is a pretty common practice of doing that. We have a couple of facilities in the state that are able to treat the material. This happens to be Danny Barrow's log yard down in Ottawa, is where this facility is, and basically what they do is they're putting logs inside of these trailers. That upper left-hand picture in this particular slide is showing two trailers. They load the logs in there, they treat with methyl bromide, and then a certificate goes with that from the Department of Agriculture, and then those can be exported around the globe with that certificate, and the certificate goes with them. The idea behind that, by treating the material, is that we're killing the insects and preventing the spread of emerald ash borer and other insects and disease, or I'm sorry, just insects with this particular method. Of course, one of the least common denominators with trees is mulching. Um, and basically, there are some mulchers out there that you just run the whole tree through, mulch that material, and ash would have a shorter life expectancy than, say, eastern red cedar or some of the other species, just because of the wood makeup. But it still could be used for mulch. But you may have to apply that mulch at a more frequent time period. Another interesting project that's in Topeka, Frito-Lay. They several years ago, I believe it was 2009, is when they officially got this boiler system up and going. Basically, the wood chips come in, they auger that into the boiler system. They're then able to use that to heat the oils and things for their chip making process. And so there are opportunities for utilizing materials that way, especially kind of, as I'm indicated before, mulching is kind of the least common denominator. If you can't come up with other uses for that material by mulching it down, you can use it for mulch, but also in chips and for heating and other applications that way. One of the things that's a little bit interesting to me also is biochar. Um, Biochar is nothing more than trying to burn the wood in a kind of reduced oxygen reduced situation, and basically you end up with char, just like you would think of with like lump charcoal that you would go buy for grilling. It's basically just carbon at that point, and by mixing it in with other compost, you can produce what we call biochar, and then that could be applied to the landscape or your garden for trying to increase the carbon content. And these are just a few examples of some demonstrations that we've accomplished over the last several years. The center upper picture is simply done by just digging a pit in the ground and putting your wood in at that point. The upper left-hand corner shows what's referred to as an Oregon kiln. And basically wood scrap material or wood material is placed in there. You continue to add to that, and then the upper right-hand corner shows the product afterward. You have to quench it so it doesn't all turn to ash and continue to burn. But in this particular case, it's been quenched by adding water, so it put out all the ignition. And so we end up with just a bunch of char in the end. And then basically we can add that to compost or add compost to that and end up with a product called biochar that is good for gardens and other applications. The lower picture is more of a commercial type application. You'll basically the tree waste was going inside of this big burner on the back side. It's called an air curtain burner, and basically it has forced air inside of there that helps or assists with the burning process. And then in the very bottom of it is a grate where when the material turns to char, it drops down through that grate and then out the back through a conveyor system. And the lower right-hand corner shows kind of the trailer there. Basically, the material's coming out the back side of the material, back side of the unit onto that conveyor system. It has to be quenched at the point where it exits the unit. basically to put it out, because you don't want to have hot embers going into your pile of char. Just be like your barbecue grill. If you have one ember in there and you continue to let oxygen get to it, it will continue to burn and ultimately turn to ash over time. But biochar is another opportunity in utilizing materials, and something that would like to see more efforts put into. And I guess with that, I would welcome questions coming up into the future. If you have questions about utilizing ash in particular, feel free to reach out, and I'd be glad to assist as much as I can along the way. Thank you.